You ever wake up and realize your soul feels heavier than your body? Like someone slipped sandbags under your ribs while you were sleeping. You make your coffee, stare out the window, and everything looks the same, but it all feels dull. Folks say depression looks like tears and tissues, but sometimes it just looks like dishes in the sink that never get washed. It looks like the smile you paste on your face before you go to work, or the way you tell everybody, "I'm fine," when the truth is, you're fading around the edges. What if depression isn't what you were taught to picture? What if it's quieter, meaner, more familiar than you realized? Stay with me. Let's name it together. Because the moment you name a thing is the moment it starts to loosen its grip. Welcome to Human Beings Radio, a little garden for the mind, body, and spirit. Some days you bloom, some days you just hold the soil together. Either way, you're still growing. Let me tell you something straight off, my beautiful being. Depression doesn't just stroll into your life politely, knock on the door and say, "Ma'am, may I come in and rearrange your soul?" No, it seeps and it creeps. It settles like red dirt dust on a porch swing in July, quiet at first, and before you know it, the whole place is coated. And when you try to brush it off, it comes right back. As you may be able to tell, I grew up in the rural South, where if you weren't tough, you didn't make it far. My grandmama, bless her, could fry chicken with one hand while paying bills with the other, but when it came to feelings, well, we didn't talk about them much. Feelings were for church hymns and for funerals. At our house, you worked, you prayed, and you kept going. My daddy left when I was very young. Estranged is the fancy word he and I discovered together, but for me, it just meant an empty chair at the table and a knot in my stomach that never untangled. So when I first felt depression as a girl, I didn't have a word for it. I just thought something was wrong with me. Back then, in our little four-square house with the screen door that never shut right, I'd sit on the porch and watch the kudzu swallow whole fence posts. That's what depression felt like. Slow, creeping vines wrapping around everything until the light was gone. Looking back, I realized that was my first education in how a thing can grow wild if you don't name it and tend it. When you live long enough with something unnamed, it starts to think it owns the place. Sometimes on those summer nights, the cicadas would sing so loud they drowned out my thoughts, and I'd rock slow, pretending the motion could shake the heaviness loose. I didn't know that what I was really craving was language, a word to pin the feeling down, to tell me I wasn't just broken inside. Years later, after a couple marriages and divorces, raising kids while working shifts that left me bone tired, I went on to study psychology. And Lord have mercy, the relief when I found out that what I'd carried all along wasn't weakness, wasn't laziness, wasn't some deep moral failing. It was depression, an illness, a pattern in the brain and the body, something that can be understood, treated, and tended. And honey, once you name a thing, you can start to heal it. So here we are, let's name it together. Let's walk slow through what depression really looks like, not just the sad movie version image of someone crying under the covers. Depression wears many disguises, and if you've lived with it, or loved someone who has, you know it can turn the ordinary into the unbearable. When I talk about this, I'm not giving you a checklist to diagnose yourself. I'm handing you a mirror. If any of it reflects back at you, know that reflection is not a failure. It's awareness. And awareness is the first crack where light can seep in. So, We know that depression isn't always dramatic sadness, but more often a dragging weight that just clings to your limbs. For me, it's been mornings where brushing my teeth felt like climbing Stone Mountain barefoot. Sometimes I'd stare at the coffee pot, willing it to brew itself. Smallest tasks felt like marching for miles. Science calls it psychomotor retardation. It's a fancy phrase for when the brain slows the body down. But sitting at my kitchen table, it felt more like molasses poured over my whole body. If you've ever woken up and felt gravity double itself overnight, you know this feeling. It's an invisible weight that presses down until even breathing feels like work. Now, Southerners know joy in very small things. Want sweet tea so cold it sweats down the mason jar, kids running through sprinklers, the smell of biscuits in the oven. But depression steals all that. Food turns to cardboard in your mouth. Laughter rings hollow. Things you once loved, painting, music, gardening, feel like chores. I remember standing at my easel once, brush in hand, staring so long at the blank canvas that I just gave up and crawled back into bed. Now that blank canvas wasn't laziness. It was my brain's chemistry, choking the light. Joy goes quiet, like crickets after a storm. And when joy is quiet, the world looks faded. Not black and white exactly, but washed out, like all the colors drained away. Sometimes it returns in flashes. A dog nuzzling at your knee, the petrichor smell of rain on dry ground. But depression convinces you it's fleeting, not worth noticing. That's one of its cruelest tricks. It teaches you not to trust the good moments. Depression also messes with cognition, memory, focus, decision making. I used to stand in the grocery store, staring at cereal boxes, unable to pick one, tears just welling up over something so small. But it's not silliness. That's your brain's frontal lobe struggling. It's like trying to think through water. Names slip, dates blur. Even reading feels like climbing a hill with no top. Some days I'd reread the same paragraph 5 times and still not know what it said. The fog can make you feel stupid, but you're not. It's your brain rerouting energy just to survive. But Bean, hear me. It's not your fault. Growing up, I thought everything was my fault. If I'd been prettier, smarter, calmer, Daddy would have stayed. If I'd been a better wife, the marriages wouldn't have cracked. Depression loves to whisper lies like that. You're broken, you're unlovable, you're the problem. But those lies are symptoms too, not truths. They sound like shame, but they're really exhaustion talking. Sometimes I just pray, make me stronger. Not realizing that strength wasn't the issue. Self-compassion was. Nobody tells you that gentleness is its own kind of power. Now, depression doesn't just live in your head. Sleep goes haywire. Some nights you toss and turn till the rooster crows. Other times you can't get out of bed for 12 hours. Appetite too. Biscuits taste like dust, or else you eat half the pan without tasting a bite. Science tells us serotonin and dopamine, the chemicals that regulate mood, appetite, and sleep, get thrown off. Again, that's not weakness. That's biology. And biology doesn't care how strong you are. You can be a marathon running, Bible quoting, casserole baking champion and still have your brain chemistry betray you. That's not moral failure. That's human wiring. I've seen folks shame themselves because the medicine bottle on their nightstand feels like proof that they're broken. It's not. It's proof that they're trying. But here's the rub. The South where I was raised has this grit and bear it culture. Depression was whispered about, if at all. Folks said you were blue or nervous, but Lord help you if you admitted to something more. People would lower their voices and offer pie instead of empathy. We inherited that silence from generations who didn't have language for mental health. They survived wars, poverty, loss, and they coped the only way they knew, by not naming pain out loud. But what was survival for them can become suffocation for us. I know many of you listening have felt that same stigma, like you're not allowed to speak the word depression without folks looking sideways at you. You learn to smile through it and say, "I'm fine," when you're not, because honesty makes others uncomfortable. But pretending is its own kind of exhaustion. So I'm here to tell you, we need to break that silence, because silence grows mold just like damp walls. And the only way to clean it out is sunlight and air. Truth spoken plain in good company. Now, if you're listening in your car or folding laundry or sitting somewhere wondering if anyone sees how hard you're fighting, I see you. You're not weak for feeling this way. You're human and you're healing, even when it doesn't look like it yet. You're listening to Human Beings Radio, a little garden for the mind, body, and spirit. If something in today's episode is planting a seed, share it with a friend, or water it a little by visiting humanbeingsradio.com. You'll find show notes, community links, and ways to help this project keep growing. We'll be right back with part 2 in just a sec. So if your mornings are heavy, your joy is gone, your mind is foggy, and your body's out of rhythm, it might be depression. Not weakness, not failure, but a diagnosable, treatable condition. Recognizing the signs of that is the first brave step. Now, we're going to dig into some less obvious symptoms. Irritability, guilt, physical pain, because depression sometimes wears a mask. Sometimes it shows up in irritability, short fuse, snapping at the kids for spilling milk, cussing in traffic at a stranger who can't even hear you. I remember once, years ago, my oldest boy tried to show me a Lego spaceship he'd built. My brain was so knotted up in depression that instead of admiring it, I barked at him to put it away. Lord, the guilt that washed over me after that. And that's another symptom right there. Guilt. And its kissing cousin, shame. A little guilt is normal. It keeps us kind. It keeps us accountable. But depression twists guilt into a whip. You don't just feel bad about what you did, you feel bad about who you are. For me, that internal monologue sounded like, "You're a terrible mama. You're a failure at everything. Nobody would notice if you just disappeared." Now those thoughts, that is classic depression. They feel personal, but they're universal symptoms. If you've thought like that, you're not alone. Another disguise depression wears is physical pain. Backaches, headaches, stomach problems. Doctors can't pin everything down. Depression heightens inflammation, lowers pain tolerance, messes with cortisol, that stress hormone that keeps us on edge. My shoulders have carried enough tension to make a chiropractor sigh. When you grow up bracing for the next blow, your body learns that posture. Depression just adds weight. I remember Grandmama at church potlucks pressing her hand to her temples, whispering about migraines. Looking back, I wonder how much of that was depression. She never would have said it out loud, though. In our family, if you slapped on lipstick and smiled for the deacon's wife and carried on, you were doing all right. But silence doesn't heal pain. Now another mask is anger. For me, in my second marriage, abusive, loud, full of slammed doors, my depression came out sideways as rage. I wasn't mean at heart. I was drowning. And when you're drowning, you flail. Now, a little plain psychology. The depressed brain is under siege. The amygdala, that almond-shaped fear center, goes into overdrive. The hippocampus shrinks. Neurotransmitters like serotonin dip low. It's like expecting a radio to play gospel but finding it stuck on static. And honey, I know about static. Whole years where my brain felt like a busted transistor radio in the corner of a dusty garage, humming just enough to remind you something's broken. Social withdrawal. Depression whispers, "Stay home, don't burden anyone." I'd cancel on friends, skip Sunday dinners, sit in a quiet house with quilt pieces spread out but never stitch a thing. The loneliness deepens the depression. And sometimes withdrawal looks like overfunctioning. The mama who bakes for every event, volunteers for everything, smiles big while hollow inside. Baby, that's just masked depression. Cracks don't mean you're broken. Cracks mean you're human. Like light through stained glass on Sunday morning, beauty still finds its way through broken places. Now, we got to talk about kids and teens, because their depression can look different. They have more irritability, withdrawal, and anger. My younger son once holed up in his room, snapping at his brother, ignoring music and his coding projects. At first, I just chalked it up to teen moodiness, until I recognized myself in him. That's when I knew that depression was tapping on his shoulder. Awareness matters. Depression doesn't fit in a tidy box. In kids, it's irritability. In adults, fatigue or pain. In elders, sometimes memory issues. Recognizing those masks is the first step toward compassion. Now, hear this. Depression isn't always about what's outside. You can have a good job, a loving partner, healthy kids, and still be depressed. It's not about gratitude or willpower. It's about brain chemistry and unprocessed trauma. I tried gratitude lists while my marriage was crumbling. They helped some, but they didn't fix the root. Healing takes layers. Therapy, sometimes medicine, always community and compassion, and grace from friends, from family, and from yourself. If you're thinking, I should be stronger, let me set that straight. Strength isn't white-knuckling through something. Strength is saying, I need help. And I wish I'd known that earlier. By the time I found recovery rooms, those smoke-filled basements with styrofoam cups of bad coffee, I was hollowed out. Alcohol had been my medicine to quiet the depression, but it nearly killed me. Sitting in those folding chairs, hearing stories that sounded like mine, I learned naming pain in community can save your life. Depression is not always tears and silence. Sometimes it's snapping at your kids, sometimes migraines, sometimes working yourself to death so you don't have to feel. If you recognize yourself here, take heart. You're not crazy or weak. You're healing. You're human. Now, Let's talk about how it tangles up with trauma, because those two dance close. I carry both. CPTSD from childhood abuse, PTSD from an assault I received at 15. Trauma etched grooves in my nervous system, so depression sank into that cracked soil. Think of a dry creek bed. Trauma is the drought. Depression is the silt that fills the cracks. Together they make the crossing really dangerous. Trauma primes the body to expect danger. Depression lays over it like a heavy quilt. You live with one foot on the gas and one on the brake until the system wears out. Science says the hippocampus shrinks, the amygdala stays lit, and you feel trapped in a house with nailed shut windows. But you can unnail them with steady work and the right help. Now, cooking, quilting, and gardening, those became my regulation. Repetitive, mindful acts tell your body the world is predictable for a minute. That's safety, and that's healing. The soil under your nails, warm water over your hands, small medicines that steady you while therapy does the deep work. I want you to try this right now. I want you to inhale for 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 6. We're going to do it. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6. That long exhale tells your vagus nerve that you're safe. I used it in recovery meetings when the urge to drink hit. Breath was my first sober medicine. Now, there are some signs that trauma survivors know well. Hypervigilance plus exhaustion, negative self-beliefs, difficulty trusting, body pain. It's like carrying a grocery bag with handles that cut your palms. You keep carrying it because you learn to, but the pain builds. Therapy changed everything. A trauma-informed therapist taught me the voice in my head was old programming. We used CBT to separate thoughts from truth. I ruined my marriage became my marriage ended because it was unsafe. That reframe cracked the window open just enough for light to come in, like clearing a soot-blackened pane. You don't get all the light back at once, but you do start to see what season it is outside. When depression hit hard, my therapist reminded me of the basics. Eat something nourishing, step outside for 10 minutes of sunlight, call a safe friend. Those aren't cures, but they're lifelines. And lifelines keep you here until deeper healing takes root. I have a little list on my fridge that just says eat, step outside, call. On bad mornings, I read it aloud like a prayer. Small, stubborn acts of care. Now, if you're drowning right now, hear me. Depression plus trauma can feel like 100-pound sack being carried through a swamp. But there are paths out. They're crooked and slow, but they're still paths. You don't have to invent them alone. Community was my first path. Those recovery rooms smelled like bad coffee and bleach and hope. But nobody gasped when I said, I don't want to be here anymore. They just nodded and said, well, then you need to keep coming back. That simple acceptance cracked the shell of shame. They didn't offer tidy answers, just attendance, somebody willing to sit while the tide passed. Creativity became another path. I've painted canvases that look like storms, stitched quilts that look like healing maps. Now, those acts don't erase the depression, but they give me a language beyond words. Paint doesn't judge your hand. Clay forgives clumsy fingers. Music remembers the rhythm of your heart. before sorrow does. And yeah, sometimes medication has to be part of the path. Antidepressants aren't weakness, they're a tool. I resisted for years, afraid of the stigma. But when I finally tried, I learned they don't change who you are. They give you enough lift to do the deeper work. Think of it like stabilizers on a wobbly porch rail. Lets you lean without falling while you rebuild the rail itself. Let's put this plain. If you've got depression tangled with trauma, the signs may look different. More irritability, more shame, more body pain, more withdrawal. But it's not hopeless. Healing comes in layers. Therapy, grounding practices, community, medicine, and grace for yourself. And lots of patience. Layering takes time. It's not a single poultice. It's a season of small, steady tending. And grace, Lord knows, is something we all need. Now, let's gather up the tools that help keep the light on. That first tool is connection. Depression wants you isolated, convinced that nobody cares. But connection, even tiny doses, is medicine. A friend who calls and talks till you laugh. A meeting where someone's story cracks you open. Even the cashier at Piggly Wiggly who says, "You take care now, darling," when you're barely holding on. Those little human stitches sew you back into the world, bit by bit. When you feel yourself slipping, reach for a thread. Even one thread can stop the unraveling. Now, secondly, we've got movement. And listen, I'm not about to tell you to train for a marathon. Lord knows I can barely make it around the block some days. But science is clear. Moving your body changes your brain chemistry. Walk to the mailbox. Stretch in the kitchen. Do like me. Put on a Motown record and two-step with your dog giving you the side eye. Movement nudges the brain like a spoon stirring coffee, mixes things back into rhythm so the day tastes a little sweeter. Even 10 minutes of sunlight and steps can turn down the dark voice for a while. Another tool, and a very important one, is professional help. Therapy is not weakness. Medicine is not weakness. They are lifelines. Taking an antidepressant for depression is no more shameful than insulin for diabetes. Your brain is an organ. If it's struggling to make or balance chemicals, why wouldn't we support it? Medication steadies the table so you can set your cup down. Therapy teaches you how to build a sturdier table over time. Sometimes that safe porch is a small room with a folding chair and someone trained to listen without fixing. And that's exactly what you need. Now that fourth tool is just small joys. This one sounds soft, but it's mighty. Depression steals color from the world, and you've got to put it back drop by drop. For me, it's fresh coffee, bare feet in grass, and driving with the windows down and the music up. Those tiny sensory pleasures are like oil on rusty gears. They help the machinery move again. Keep a list taped to the fridge. Small sparks that can bring a flicker. When you're empty, borrow one. Now, I can't talk about all this hope without talking about faith. Not the kind that shames you or calls depression sin, but the quiet kind that whispers, "You're not alone, you're loved, and you're held." For me, faith looks a lot less like loud amens and more like sitting with a mug on the porch while the dawn lights the oaks. Presence, not performance. In my darkest nights, I pray without words, just a groan, and somehow I can still feel something holding me. Call it God, spirit, love, the ancestors. The name matters less than the knowing that there's a power bigger than depression and it's on your side. And if you've been told faith should fix everything, let this be permission to find a faith that simply holds you through the hard parts. A woman I knew in recovery used to say, depression is like quicksand. The more you thrash, the deeper you sink. But if you can just go still and call for help and wait for the rope, somebody will pull you out. I heard that on a night when my heart wanted to go quiet forever. But that image kept me breathing until someone arrived. Sometimes survival isn't fighting harder. It's being still long enough to be rescued. If you're listening right now and you're in that quicksand, please, for the love of all that is holy, don't go under quietly. Call for help. Let someone throw you a rope. If you don't know who to call, reach out to a counselor, a crisis line, a safe friend. Let someone know that you're in trouble, and people will show up. And know this, my beautiful, beautiful beings, you're not ever too broken that you can't heal, and you're never, ever taking up too much space. Be well, and remember, sometimes you bloom, and sometimes you're just holding the soil together. But either way, you're growing. This is Human Beings Radio, stories of growth, grace, and starting over. If these conversations help you steady your roots, pass it along. You can support the garden at buymeacoffee.com/Human Beings Radio, or simply leave a kind comment. Every share, every listen helps light reach a little farther. Now, stay rooted, because our next segment is Everything I Need to Know I Learned from PBS. Everything I Need to Know I Learned from PBS. Today's referenced episode is Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Season 15, Episode 1, aired in 1984. You know, when I think back on the hours I spent in front of that little boxy television, one memory always stands taller than the rest. Fred Rogers, cardigan buttoned, sneakers tied, looking straight into the camera as if he could see me. In one episode, he sat down with his puppets and talked softly about sadness. He didn't give it a villain or try to fix it with a song. He just said sometimes we feel sad and don't even know why, and that's okay. Feelings are real. They matter. I didn't know it then, but that simple truth was revolutionary. Because you see, for a lot of us Gen X kids, the message we always got out in the world was shake it off, toughen up, don't make a scene. Fred dared to say the opposite, that we could name our sadness without apology, that being human meant feeling the full weather inside ourselves. When I re-watch that clip now, his voice feels like a hand on my shoulder. It says, you don't have to hide your heavy days. Lord, that hits deep for anyone who's wrestled with depression. There's comfort in hearing that your low mood isn't a moral failure, it's a signal. It's your body waving a small flag saying, hey, I need care. I think of that moment sometimes when the house is quiet and my own thoughts start to sink. I picture Fred sitting beside me on that worn porch swing, cardigan sleeves brushing against the paint-chipped armrest, and saying, you're not bad for feeling sad. You're just human. Every time, something inside me just unclenches. Because that's what he taught us, really. That kindness isn't just what we give others, it's what we owe ourselves. And naming a feeling, no matter how heavy, is an act of kindness. It takes courage to say, I'm not okay right now. But once it's spoken, it loses some of its power to isolate us. Fred made sadness feel less like a secret and more like a season, something that comes, stays a while, and then passes when tended. He showed us that even on the grayest days, there's a neighborly kind of love waiting to listen, and that lesson holds. Every time I think of him, I remember the work of being human starts with being gentle with what we feel. So, today, if the world feels too loud or too heavy, maybe pour yourself a small cup of stillness. Take Mr. Rogers' advice. Listen to your heart without judgment. You don't have to fix the sadness. Just let it have a name. That is the first step toward healing, and it's the absolute kindest one of all. It's time for a bean break, where we plant a seed, water it, and watch it grow. Today's seed is recognizing what's growing in the dark. Today's seed is that awareness. Maybe you've felt the heaviness that we talked about, that quiet weight that coats everything like red dirt dust. Your seed today is to simply notice it without judgment. Now, take a breath. I want you to inhale through your nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6. Imagine each breath washing a little light across that porch swing in your mind, the one that's been sitting still for too long. As you breathe, say to yourself, I am learning to see what's here. You're not fixing, not fighting. You're just seeing it. That's the water. So here's the growth. Every time you name what's real, even pain, you are already healing. Awareness is how that seed cracks open. So keep tending that light. Keep watering those seeds. You can do this, beans. I know you can. It's time for Blue Book Bindings. Here in Blue Book Bindings, I lean on the big blue book a lot. It was written to help folks beat back alcoholism, but what I've learned is it's really a guide for just being human. The steps, the honesty, the surrender, they work on every kind of pain, not just the bottle. So each week, I like to pull a line that reminds us how recovery is really just another word for healing. The world and its people really dominated us. When I first read that passage from Alcoholics Anonymous, I remember closing the book and just staring out the window for a really long time. You don't have to have a drinking problem to know what it means to be dominated by the world and its people. Sometimes it's a boss's tone or a partner's silence, or the way social media turns into a measuring stick for a life that suddenly feels too small. Depression, anxiety, trauma, they all work the same way. They hijack your weather system. You wake up under someone else's sky. Depression doesn't shout. It drips. It starts with a thought you don't question. I'm too much. I'm not enough. Then the drizzle turns to rain, and before long you are soaked clear through. When I was deep in it, I'd try to reason my way out. If I could just think the right thought, fix the right thing, say the perfect sentence, maybe I'd feel better. But that's what this passage calls the brainstorm. For some of us, thinking becomes a kind of self-harm. We loop the same pain until it grooves into the brain like a needle stuck in a record. And the grouch, that's resentment. The slow burn anger that pretends to keep us safe. It says, if I stay mad, I'll stay strong. But really it's poison, the quiet kind. The kind that whispers, don't forgive, you'll lose your edge. It feels powerful, but it eats you from the inside out. The big book says the solution begins with admitting powerlessness. That is a tough sell for those of us who grew up believing survival meant control. For me, powerlessness used to sound like failure. But I've learned it's actually the first deep breath after years of holding one in. It's not I give up, it's I give over. It's realizing I can't stop the rain, but I can stop standing in the storm without an umbrella. Sometimes surrender looks like the smallest, most defiant act of kindness toward yourself. Eating something warm, texting a friend just to say, today's hard. Letting yourself not answer every message right away. That's not laziness, that's recovery. Because every time we release one tiny piece of control, we make room for grace to walk in. There was a season in my life where resentment was my only language. I woke up angry and I went to bed exhausted from being angry. Everyone was either disappointing me or expecting something I didn't have to give. I didn't realize I was the one handing out the script. I'd built this whole invisible courtroom in my head. Every conversation was evidence, every silence a verdict. And the jury, made up of everyone I'd ever loved, never voted in my favor. That's what it means to be dominated by the world and its people. Even if they're not saying a word, they live rent-free in your mind. You carry them like ghosts through your day. The truth is, most of them aren't even thinking about you. They're too busy fighting their own invisible trials. When I finally got tired enough, I tried something new. I wrote one of those people's names on a slip of paper, put it in an old mason jar, and said out loud, I release you. It wasn't dramatic. The sky didn't open. But the next morning, I woke up a little lighter. That's all surrender ever promises. A little lighter. Surrender isn't a single moment. It's a daily posture, sometimes hourly. It's not passive, it's practice. When resentment knocks, I try to answer with curiosity. What am I afraid will happen if I let this go? Usually the answer is something tender. I'm afraid they'll hurt me again. Or, I'm afraid no one will see how much it hurt the first time. That's the secret power of forgiveness. It's not pretending the wound didn't happen. It's refusing to let it define your coordinates. You can't drive forward staring at the rearview mirror. And overthinking, the brainstorm, comes from the same fear. We think if we understand the pain perfectly, we can keep it from happening again. But understanding is not the same as healing. Sometimes the analysis is just anxiety in a tuxedo. What helps more is grounding. Feel your feet. Notice a color in the room. Breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. Say something kind to yourself that you don't fully believe yet. That's how we begin to stop letting the world dominate us. We start living from the inside out again. So tonight, if the weight's heavy, open your palms. Maybe you can't fix everything, but maybe you can release one thing. A regret, a should, a judgment that's overstayed its welcome. Let it slide off you like rain down glass. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to hold it. Just watch it fall and know you're still here. Freedom doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with that quiet decision to stop gripping. The book says, for alcoholics, these things are poison. I'd add, for anyone who's ever tried to think their way out of pain, it's medicine to remember. You don't have to win every argument inside your head to deserve peace. So take that breath. Turn your face toward the light, whatever small corner of it you can find, and remember, even in the middle of the mess, you are growing something real. Now, before we let ourselves wind down, let's take a breath. Pour another cup. You're a part of the Human Beings Radio community now, a mix of storytelling, seeking, and slow blooming our souls. You can join the conversation and find our latest merch and writings at humanbeingsradio.com. Thanks for tending this space with us. I hope grace and kindness follow you all week long. Have a good one, Beans. So, here are my final thoughts from the kitchen. You know, by the time we get to the kitchen at the end of the day, the stories have mostly told themselves. The pots are empty, the dishes wait, and what's left are the small truths that don't always fit into neat lessons. Tonight's truth is, we are not built to live at the mercy of every storm that blows through. Yes, the world and its people can be loud, opinionated, careless, sometimes cruel, but they don't get the final say over who you are. You do. You get to decide what kind of garden you'll be. Maybe today you managed a full bloom. Maybe you just held the soil together. Either one counts. When the mind starts circling, when resentment or guilt tries to climb back up the vine, come back to that small act of surrender we talked about. Not the dramatic kind, just the quiet release. I can't control this, but I can care for myself through it. That's the heartbeat of recovery, of growth, of grace. It's not about perfection. It's about returning again and again to the truth that you are still here, still worthy of tending. If you can, take one more deep breath before we go. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Let it sound like relief. Maybe look around your own kitchen or whatever space you're in right now. Notice one small, ordinary thing. A mug, a crumb, a pet snoring nearby. And let it remind you that life happens in the details. That's where gratitude hides. That's where peace takes root. So tonight, leave the heavy questions in the sink for tomorrow. Wash your hands, water your spirit, rest your mind. The garden can wait until morning. So I've been preparing for this for quite a very long time, and I very much wasn't even sure if anyone would find my website before the show went live, but apparently at least a few people already have, which just makes my heart do that weird little flutter thing between surprise and gratitude. The site's only been up for a few days, but someone already used the little contact form to send in a question, and I'm very excited. So I thought I'd close today with a new segment that we'll visit often, and I've just decided to call it Letters from the Garden. This one came from a listener named Ellie in North Carolina, who I'm pretty sure is a friend of mine on Facebook, possibly. She wrote, "Hi Mira, I stumbled onto Human Beings Radio through a friend's post, and I've been poking around the website and getting a feel for it. I'm joining the Facebook group, but before I do, I wanted to ask, what is this exactly? Is it a podcast about recovery, mental health, art, life, or is it a more personal, like your story? I guess I'm just wondering what kind of garden I'm walking into." Now, Ellie, that is the best possible question for a first letter, because honestly, I've been asking myself the same thing all week, or really since I started this project. Here is the most honest answer I can give. It is all of that, and none of it neatly labeled. Human Beings Radio started as a small idea in my kitchen. Me, a notebook full of scribbles, a mic that didn't want to cooperate, my dogs making a bunch of noise, and the hope that if I could make something honest enough that someone out there might hear it on a hard night and feel less alone. I didn't want to build a regular self-help show, and I didn't want to make another recovery podcast either, because I'm not trying to fix anyone. I'm just trying to talk about the parts of life that most people skip over, the messy middles, the gray days, the hard-earned grace, maybe lend a little wisdom or advice. So yeah, I'm going to talk about sobriety. I do often, and mental health and loss and creativity, but through the lens of a regular human being who's been through some things and still has the ability to see light. And maybe that's what this little garden really is, a place for stories that are still growing. Sometimes we'll plant something new, sometimes we'll just sit in the dirt and breathe. There'll be books and food and little lessons I didn't know I was learning until much later. And hopefully there'll be you, writing in, showing up, asking good questions, participating in the communities. So, thank you, Ellie. Thank you for being the very first person to send a message through that little Ask Mira Anything page, and for joining the Facebook group, because that's where all this is going to start feeling like community instead of just me talking into a microphone. And if you're listening out there and you'd like to write into and you want me to say your name, because Ellie's is the first and only name I know, so I'm just going to say Ellie, until you write in. You can do it at humanbeangsradio.com or through the group in Facebook if you would like. Tell me what you're thinking about, what you're struggling with, or even what made you laugh this week. Maybe there's something in particular you want me to talk about. You just let me know. All of it belongs here. Because this isn't a show about being perfect. You will find that in the way that I probably technically edit the show as well. It's a show about being human, about how we keep tending our patch of life even when the weather's unpredictable. So, Ellie and everyone else just finding your way here, welcome to the garden. You don't need to bring anything but yourself. We'll figure out the rest together. Till then, my beautiful, beautiful human beings, Y'all have a good one. You know, music isn't made from the notes alone. It's made from the space between them. That tiny pocket of silence where the sound exhales and waits to begin again. Life is like that too. We keep trying to fill every gap, every awkward pause, every still moment. But what if the pause is where the healing hides? Between the doing and the resting, between the saying and the listening, there's a pulse that says, I'm still here. Not fixed, not finished, just present. If you're multitasking right now, maybe stop for a breath. Let yourself not produce for just a few seconds. No notes, no noise, just the hum of being alive. Because maybe recovery, maybe sanity itself, isn't about getting louder or brighter. Maybe it's about learning to live comfortably inside the quiet. So, this has been the pause between notes. I hope your music is beautiful today. If you or someone you love is struggling with depression, anxiety, or addiction, please don't wait. Reach out to a counselor, a doctor, or a local support group. You can call 988 in the U.S. for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, 24 hours a day, every day. There's real help out there, and you deserve it. This message comes from Human Beings Radio, reminding you that healing starts with one brave conversation. You've been listening to Human Beings Radio, a little garden for the mind, body, and spirit. If something from today's episode found a place to grow in you, share it with someone who might need a little bit of light. You can find show notes, upcoming topics, and ways to support the project at humanbeingsradio.com. And if you'd like to help keep this garden blooming, visit buymeacoffee.com/humanbeingsradio. Follow along on your favorite platform, leave a kind review if you can, find us on all the socials, and come back next time. We'll keep tending together. Until then, stay rooted, seek light, and remember, even after the hardest rain, the garden always finds its way back to green. Writing, graphics, and all the technical stuff was me, Mira Crowe, and the original music was my kid, John Henry. And before we close, a quick note. I'm not a therapist, doctor, or licensed counselor, just a fellow traveler sharing stories, research, and reflections that have helped me along the way. Nothing here is meant to replace professional, medical, or mental health advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to someone qualified, a doctor, therapist, or counselor who can walk that road with you. You don't have to do any of this alone. Help really is out there, and you deserve it.